Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory, boring ancient history stories for sleep. Tonight, we will enter 12 civilizations, not to learn about the gods, but to learn about the four-legged friend, the one even the gods once relied on. Whether you like it or not, dogs have always been close to our ancestors throughout most of human history. Dogs of all breeds have been regarded as loyal companions in nearly every culture around the world. Their loyalty and cheerful spirit, along with their protective instincts, made them the perfect companions. Before we begin, if you truly find this a comforting place to take refuge late at night, hit like and subscribe to the channel. But only if you really want to. Just like the rules in an old tavern, only stay if you need a quiet corner. And you know what I love most? Looking at the comments and seeing where you're from and what time it is there. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 in the morning or 5 in the morning, you're still here. And I see you. Now turn off the lights, turn on a small fan if you have one. Not because it's hot, but for that gentle humming sound. Humans once survived through millions of nights, not thanks to iron doors, code locks, or alarm bells, but because of the well-timed bark of a creature that couldn't speak. Dogs didn't invent the wheel. They didn't create the calendar, but they knew when the wind would shift. They weren't better hunters than you, but they always entered the forest before you. And they didn't write laws, but they were the first beings to understand what loyalty meant. They didn't build pyramids, didn't found empires, but wherever humans existed, they were there too. You can check any history book, from Babylon to the North Sea. You'll find the names of kings, generals, battles. But while thousands of anonymous people lived and died without a name, a dog named Abutu in Egypt had its own limestone tombstone, but its name isn't even on it. It never demanded to be heard in that history book. It was just there, when you were hungry, when you were shivering, when you were cast aside. Not like cats, sometimes loving you, sometimes treating you like the help. Not like horses, beautiful, useful, but always with a price. Dogs are something you don't pay for with gold, but with affection. No civilization, not even Egypt with its mummies, Greece with its epics, China with its rituals, or the Maya with temples soaring above the clouds, ever forgot to mention dogs. In Assyria, dogs were carved into stone steles, standing beside warriors as symbols of invincibility. In Zhou-era China, dogs appeared in state-founding rituals as a pledge of loyalty. And in the Olmec civilization, one of the oldest in the Americas, they found infant graves buried with dogs, as if those tender souls needed a protector on their journey to the next world. You might not see dogs in epic poems, but you'll see their footprints etched deep into the soul of every culture. There is one thing that has never betrayed us. In modern times, you sleep on memory foam. The air conditioner hums softly like a breath, and a dog lies curled at the foot of your bed. In Egypt, you slept on cold stone, beside a dog mummified because the bond was so strong. In Persia, you didn't just sleep. You prepared to meet a white dog at the Chimvat Bridge after death. In the Maya world, you had to swim across the river of souls, and only dogs knew the way. No matter the era, when you close your eyes, there is a creature who doesn't close theirs. It wakes just to keep your sleep safe. It wears no armor, has no throne, no statues raised in its honor. But every silent doorway in this world has a dog lying before it, not to guard the gate, but to guard you. It doesn't care what your job is, doesn't know which school you graduated from, but it remembers your footsteps. And just with that, it will hold your place in its dream all night, You might not have your name written in history books. You might live a life without glory. But if someone lies at your feet all night with a warm breath and unconditional loyalty, then you are already a king in its kingdom. Welcome to the land where the first written language was born. Not for poetry, not for writing kingly biographies, but for accounting. And in that ledger, there's a clear entry. 2 dogs, Brave One and Useless. Brave One could have been a hunting dog, a loud barker, or simply one that didn't run when it thundered. Useless could have been a footlicker, scared of cats, or one that slept through the night watch. No one knows exactly what they did, but clearly someone saw enough value to carve their names into a clay tablet. In Sumer, over 5,000 years ago, humans began doing something strange, putting collars on dogs, not for decoration. There were no security cameras, no tracking chips. Some collars were simple leather. Some bore talismanic carvings. Some had cuneiform markings, like an ancient world QR code to identify their owner. Collars could bear names, could bear ownership, and sometimes nicknames. Archaeologists have found dog collars made of leather, bronze, even fired clay, with inscriptions like, "Belongs to Ur-Lugal, do not take it." Don't think dogs back then only came in 2 types. Sumerian records have many more dog names. Your name might be Lugal-Zagesi, divine sounding, but your dog's name could be no good. And maybe only one of you will be remembered 5,000 years later. Windchaser, the Growler, Loyal Face, and of course, no good. You could write history about the Ur Empire, but in the end, what we remember might just be the sarcastic name of a dog who never did anything important. They didn't just live, they were also buried with their owners. A tomb in the city of Ur was unearthed, where a man's body was found, and a dog lay with its chin on his leg, as if it was still waiting for its owner to wake up and go for a morning walk, not out of superstition, but out of attachment. One man dies, one dog follows, as if the duty wasn't done yet. Did you know? Maybe it didn't understand why you cried, but it sat beside you, and 5,000 years later, they found its name, not yours. Sometimes, the dog is the only one remembered on a tombstone. An ordinary person may be forgotten by all. No headstone, no books. Just unidentified remains. But a dog, even if useless, could still bear an inscription. Beloved of the house. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to die. And when you open them again, you're standing before a dark hallway. No gods to greet you, no golden gates, just a black-headed dog, Anubis, the Egyptian god with a dog's head, not just a guide. Anubis was the first to lay hands on the corpse. When the living left the room, it was this grave-keeping god who bowed his head to begin the ritual, as if death wasn't the end, but a final solemn greeting, not to bark and scare the dead, but to guide the soul through darkness. Egyptians didn't see death as the end. They believed it was just another journey, and dogs were the most trusted guides for that journey. Dogs don't judge. Dogs don't weigh your heart against a feather like Osiris. Dogs just go ahead of you, across the reed fields, across the Soul River, across memory and forgetfulness. In Egypt, dogs weren't just pets. They were sacred escorts. When an owner died, if the bond was close enough, the dog would be mummified too, buried next to the person, sometimes even with its own tombstone. You know what? Some owners mourn their dogs by shaving their eyebrows. Yes, no crying, no eulogy, just shaved eyebrows for mourning. If you saw someone with a bald forehead, it wasn't a razor accident. Maybe they had just lost a four-legged friend. One of the most famous dogs of the Old Kingdom was named Batu. Not a royal dog, just the dog of a pharaoh's servant. But when it died, it was buried with its own coffin, placed in the royal treasury, and its name engraved on a tombstone, while thousands of servants left behind not a single word. In the city of Sinopolis, which means city of dogs, there were not only dog graves. Sinopolis was also the center of Anubis worship, with a temple with a special dog mummification zone, and people brought sacrifices as part of a plea. Please guide my father's soul the right way. Thousands of dog corpses were found mummified, buried in caves like soul cemeteries. Not all were beloved pets. Many were sacrifices to Anubis, as if their souls were prayers wrapped in flesh and quietly sent to the underworld. When the dead were lowered into the grave, someone would say, "Let the dog look one last time." Not out of superstition, but because no one was better at guiding you through the afterlife than it. You might die without a grave, but if you were a dog, you could be mummified, buried with ritual, and leave behind a collar with a name like Brave One, Storm Watcher, or even Faithful Fool. You live your whole life to be remembered. It only lives to be by your side, and in the end, its collar might be preserved. While your name might never be engraved, you're dead. Don't panic. Everyone goes through it. You've left your body and stepped onto a strange bridge. It's not made of wood, not of stone. It's the Chinvat Bridge, the path between the world of the living and the afterlife. In front of you are two dogs. They are called Shabrang and Spentamenu, two beings with four eyes, who can see the deepest sins and the fears you haven't confessed. Not one, two dogs, each with two heads. They don't growl, they don't bark, they just look straight into your soul. You want to cross the bridge? Fine. If you lived well, kindly, without lies, without harming others, the bridge suddenly becomes wide as a boulevard, and you walk across like it's a market stroll. But if you once stole temple money, betrayed others, shattered trust, the bridge shrinks to the width of a hair. You slip, fall, straight into a place Persians called the House of Lies. And who takes you there? Not a demon, not a monster, but a dog. The role of dogs in Zoroastrianism. Persians believed dogs were the first creatures to sense death. They don't speak, don't cry, but they know. There was a ritual called Sagdid, the dog's gaze. People chose dogs with four eyes, not a myth, just white spots around their black eyes, symbolizing the ability to see the world and the darkness beyond it. When someone died, a dog was brought in, allowed to look at the face one last time, not for farewell, but to ward off the demons stalking the soul. A dog walks around the deceased 3 times, each circle like a declaration. This soul is not alone. I am here. No one has the right to take it. If you beat a dog, torture it, starve it, people believed your soul would not be greeted by dogs. No one would guide you across the bridge. No one would protect you from the devils. You'd fall straight into hell, no judgment needed. The Vendidad scripture says, if you beat a dog to death, your soul will be suspended between heaven and earth. No light shall touch it, no prayer shall rescue it. In a world divided between light and darkness, dogs were the creatures standing in between. They didn't pick sides. They just led those who deserved it toward the light. Zoroastrianism didn't worship dogs. They respected dogs as guardians of the light, and if anyone dared to reject dogs, then it meant He was rejecting his own chance at salvation after death. In Persia, you didn't need a loyal dog, just one that saw you and didn't turn away. It didn't need you to be rich, didn't need you to be great, only kind. And if a dog walks ahead of you, even in the dark, then you will never be lost. Your name is Yudhishthira, the last righteous king of the Kuru dynasty. After the great war of Kurukshetra, where thousands died, you walk alone. All your brothers have fallen. You have only one friend left, a dog. It says nothing. It doesn't need to know you're a king. It doesn't ask about the past. It just walks. Because in this world, at the very least, there exists a creature who loves you without reason, just walks behind you, from one mountain step to the next, from cracked earth to the edge of the sky. You're thin, tired, hungry. So is it. But it doesn't leave you. And then, finally, heaven opens. A god appears, voice echoing, "Welcome, Yudhishthira. You have been chosen. Step into heaven, where there is no more suffering, no more war, no more dogs." Many are allowed in without question. Gold brings them through the gate. Power exempts them from the test. But only one man is tested by a dog. Yudhishthira stands still. He looks back. The dog looks at him, says nothing. Just sits, as if used to being left behind, but not this time. "If it can't enter," Yudhishthira says, "then neither will I. I cannot betray the only one who never betrayed me." Because he had seen betrayal in war, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where his brothers fell because of lies. This time, he chooses silence and loyalty. Silence, as long as a human life. Then the god smiles and says, "That dog is no ordinary animal. It is Dharma, the embodiment of justice, the principle you have followed your whole life. The one who does not abandon it is the one who does not abandon the truth in his own heart." That was just a test. For the one worthy of heaven is the one willing to refuse it, just to not abandon a dog. And so, the king steps into the light with his four-legged friend. No throne, no soldiers, just two beings who had walked through the very end of loneliness together. You die. People don't cry much. They just prepare carefully. Part of the burial ritual is choosing a dog to kill. This ritual is called Yi, performed in the presence of a shaman. The dog is tied to a wooden stake, sacrificed beneath bronze drums, like a key to open the gate between two worlds. Not out of hatred, but because they believed it would guard your grave. In ancient Chinese culture, especially from the Shang dynasty to the early Han, dogs were a common sacrificial offering, not for food, but to be sent to the other side, sent like a guard. The ancients believed dogs are not afraid of ghosts because they see what humans cannot. A soul needs someone to watch the door, not a sword, but a barking mouth and loyal heart. Ancient cemeteries had small pits next to the main tomb, where dogs were buried alongside the dead, not by accident, but as ritual. The dead will not be alone. There will be a creature waiting for them to awaken, to bark at the dawn. In some cases, dogs were killed to break a curse. If there was illness, misfortune, people would kill a dog so the bad luck would follow it away. The dog bore it. The dog died first. The living went on living. Unaware that, sometimes the price was a loyal life. By the Han Dynasty, nobles began to use jade or ceramic dog statues. Han scholars began to question, does sacrificing a being truly bring peace to a soul? And they chose to keep the symbol instead of killing real dogs. A kind of progress, maybe, but also a way of turning emotion into metaphor. No need for the real dog, just its image. As for the bond, left behind in the world of the living. On ancient tombstone inscriptions, one line reads, "I buried my loyal friend with me, not out of sorrow, but because I wanted to hear that familiar bark if one day my soul couldn't find its way." In some old tombs, claw marks were found in the dirt. Dogs wouldn't lie still. They had tried to dig their way out, or they were just trying to return. People killed dogs to not feel alone. People buried dogs to feel protected, even in death. But no one ever asked, did the dog choose that? Was it willing to guard a world it didn't understand? Or did it only know one thing, that the one it loved was beneath the ground, and it didn't want to go anywhere else? A dog that guards the prison of the underworld, and a dog that waits for its master until death. That is ancient Greece, a place where gods could turn into bulls, swans, or golden rain. But dogs were still dogs, and always loyal. Cerberus, the dog who lets no one return. Imagine walking to the gates of Hades, the Greek underworld. Before you stand Cerberus, a three-headed dog with a snake tail and a massive body. It doesn't bark, it just stares, each head like a memory you want to deny. 3 heads represent the 3 times your soul regrets most, what was done, what it fears, and what it will never get to do. 1 head growls at the past, 1 guards the present, 1 waits for you to make a mistake. Cerberus was assigned to guard the gates of the underworld, letting no dead escape and no living enter. Only a few ever passed it, Hercules using force, but he didn't kill, because Zeus ordered, bring it to the surface, intact. And Cerberus returned to work as if it had never raged. Orpheus used music, and Psyche used honeycakes. Every time someone passed, it was a life or death negotiation. The Greeks didn't worship dogs, but they understood. Only a dog is loyal enough to stand guard over hell. And even with 3 heads, even if ferocious, Cerberus was still just a dog carrying out orders. It never betrayed its master, never fell asleep. Argos, the dog who needed no magic. If Cerberus is the dog of the underworld, then Argos is the dog of the heart. You are Odysseus. You spend 20 years trying to return home after the Trojan War. You come back in disguise as a beggar. No one recognizes you, not your wife, not your children, not your servants, only 1 dog. They say, Argos wasn't allowed in the house. He lay on a pile of dung in the yard, unfed, untouched. And still, he waited. Argos, old, hunched, hair falling off, too weak to run. He just lifted his head, looked at you once. Then, he died. No need for you to say his name. No need to embrace him. Just 1 look, and he knew. My master has returned. Now I can close my eyes. Argos didn't kill, didn't guard a tomb, didn't watch a gate. He just waited. And you might ask, who is nobler, Cerberus with 3 heads guarding hell, or a blind, toothless dog, just lying there waiting for someone who went far away? 1 guarded the gate to the underworld, 1 guarded a memory. And sometimes, memory is more painful than hell. There are creatures that need no wisdom, no divine power. They just need to know who you are, and that is enough. Enough to guard, enough to wait, enough to die once you're home. No romance here, no 3-headed Cerberus, no tear-soaked Argos. This is ancient Rome, practical, efficient, and full of laws. What law? The law requiring every farm to raise at least 2 dogs. Don't think Rome was all philosophers and generals. The Romans were master organizers. And to guard their property, They didn't believe in luck. They believed in fangs, loud barking, and well-fed dogs. Cave Canem, a Latin warning step into any villa in Pompeii. You might see the mosaic at your feet, Cave Canem, beware of the dog. In Pompeii, they found mosaics of chained dogs, fur raised, teeth bared. No one wandered in without chills stepping over that threshold. It wasn't a joke. Roman dogs weren't for petting. They were guards, four-legged alarm systems, sometimes even thigh-biting bodyguards. Some dogs were trained to protect at night, guard grain storage, and there were breeds assigned to the army, marching with soldiers. Some wore light armor, charged enemy lines, or carried messages from commanders, loyal to the final battle line, sniffing out spies, chasing runaway slaves. Romans engraved their dogs' names on collars. Some collars had small bells, so owners knew where the dog was, or if it had just chased someone, not out of affection, but in case one got stolen, they'd have evidence. Law and trust. In the 12 Tables, Rome's foundational legal code, there is a clear rule. Any farm without dogs must have a bell to prevent theft, meaning dog. Official alarm system. No dog. You need machinery. But sorry, this is the 1st century before the Common Era. Only dogs knew how to bark. When dogs were part of property. In some noble wills, dogs were listed as important assets, not to be left to someone for love, but so the heir could continue using them to guard the house. Meaning, you didn't raise a dog. You owned a dog like you owned a fence. Dogs, like slaves, were not to be loved, but to serve. They were not free, but not forgotten either. And so, in a world paved with glory, among statues of gods and military victories, there were 2 dogs per farm. No tears, no kisses, just growling behind grapevines. Norse, feasting with Odin, guarding with the underworld. Before alarm bells existed, before theology, even before Rome drew its maps, the Norse already had a dog guarding the gates of the underworld. Not Cerberus, but Garm. Cerberus kept order. Garm howled when all order was breaking. Garm, the dog that growls before Ragnarok. In Norse mythology, Garm is the dog, sometimes called a wolf, that guards the gates of Helheim, the realm where souls of the inglorious dead are kept. It doesn't bark aimlessly. Every growl is a sign that Ragnarok is coming, the end of the world. When Garm howls, the sky cracks, trees shake, and the gods begin to put on armor. Garm howls, chains shatter, and the gates of hell swing wide. Garm isn't as famous as Fenrir, not as poetic as Argos. It simply guards death, lets no dead escape, lets no living enter. And then, when the end of the world breaks loose, Garm will fight Tyr, the god of war. Both will kill each other. A dog and a god both die for guarding the last bit of order. Freki and Geri, the ones who never knew fullness Odin, the supreme god, eats nothing. Their names mean Freki, the ravenous one, and Geri, the greedy one, but they never consumed loyalty. At the feast table, the meat is shared with his 2 wolf dogs, Freki and Geri. People often think they were wolves, but ancient descriptions show they were more like northern wild dogs, silent, bloodthirsty, but loyal. Odin raised dogs, but did not pet them. He let them eat flesh, because that was the only way they would remember who their master was. Dogs in the Norse world didn't live long. They were buried with warriors. At Uppsala, a tomb was excavated where a dog lay curled around its master's boots, as if waiting to go along, to lead the soul into Valhalla, the warrior's banquet hall, where people eat, drink, and wait for the end of the world. In this world, some dogs guard gates, some eat meat with gods, some die with their masters. No one took them for walks. No one taught them to sit, lie down, shake. They only knew one thing. When the end comes, I will bark, and if needed, I will die with the one who believed in me. It doesn't keep records of sins. It just remembers how you treated it. Life is also a river of Xibalba, and sometimes the only thing that keeps you afloat is how you treated the small creatures who couldn't fight back. You can't take money to the other side, can't take gold, can't take reasons or excuses. You only carry how you lived, and a dog who might remember that. You may think you're strong, that you can swim alone, but in the waters of death, you need a creature that trusts you and pulls you toward the light. Some names vanish after one generation, and some names are still carved on the royal limestone of Egypt, even though their owners had only 4 legs. The brave one, good herder, north wind, useless pharaohs had names as long as paragraphs, but dogs only needed 2 words, and everyone knew how they lived. They weren't the names of generals, not high priests, not the pharaoh's wives, but the names of dogs who once lived in ancient Egyptian palaces. The Egyptians didn't just raise dogs, they gave dogs tombs, used fine limestone, carved the names carefully, and mummified them. A dog, mummified, wrapped in linen, with a small statue placed beside it. The owner, often a high official or noble, shaved their eyebrows to mourn, cried, and buried some bread with the dog, so it wouldn't be hungry in the next world. Sometimes, they buried the dog in the royal treasury. Like the dog Batu, buried with the royal treasures, with a small statue and a separate memorial stone inscribed with its name. Not because it was worth gold, but because it never betrayed. The ancient Egyptians believed that dogs and jackals could smell souls. They sensed when something was wrong, heard the voices of the dead, and so Anubis was born, the god with a dog's head, wearing mourning robes, guiding souls to the hall of soul weighing, where the heart was balanced against a feather. If the heart was heavier than the feather, you were devoured by a monster. If the heart was light, light like loyalty without reason, light like a dog that stayed when everyone else left, Anubis led you onward. When memory doesn't belong to humans, no pharaoh statue ever wagged a tail, no general ever slept at his master's feet, but on those stone tablets, names like Useless and North Wind still remain, with inscriptions like, "The friend who did not leave me, even when I was no longer me." There's no bronze statue for a dog, but people's hearts remember its name longer than those with monuments. Maybe you once wanted your name engraved somewhere, in a book, on a building, on the internet, but maybe a name carved in stone for a creature that couldn't read is the most beautiful proof of loyalty. You don't need power. You just need someone to remember you by the name you once had. You've seen it before, not in daylight, but in a dream, in that half-asleep, half-awake moment when you no longer know where you are. A breath, a pair of eyes glowing in the dark, and a tail gently wagging. Dogs don't know tomorrow. They only know now. And if you're sad, they lie next to you. If you're scared, they guard the door. Not for reward, not by command, only because they don't know how to leave. People call that loyalty, but sometimes it's just a heart that doesn't know how to disconnect. Cerberus had 3 heads, guarding the world beneath the earth, But your dog has only one head and guards just one person. Garm guards the end of the world. Dogs in Egypt guide you through death. Dogs in Maya drag you across the Black River. But the dog beside your bed doesn't lead anyone anywhere. It just stays. Stays when you can't sleep. Stays when you're disappointed. Stays when you're no longer yourself. Maybe one day you'll leave this world without notice, without preparation. But maybe it'll be waiting at the gate, saying nothing, just breathing softly. And when you come close, it'll turn and walk ahead, leading you across a bridge with no name, to a place with no time, just a very soft bark, as if to say, I haven't forgotten you. You don't need a statue, don't need credit, don't need the world to know you. You just need a small creature, standing in the dream you're having, deciding not to leave. You might be someone in society, but in the eyes of a dog, you are the entire world. Einstein. Heliogabalus, the most depraved emperor of ancient Rome. Fue. In the spring of 217 after the Common Era, the Roman Empire was bleeding. The cracks that had long simmered beneath the marble surface of power now began to crumble in chunks. Externally, the frontier provinces were constantly rebelling. In the east, Parthia remained a persistent threat. In the north, the Germanic and Sarmatian tribes were joining forces, eyeing the gaps in Rome's weakening defenses. But internally, right at the heart of Roman power, was a void. Emperor Caracalla, who once declared himself the embodiment of Alexander the Great, was assassinated while urinating by the roadside during a campaign in Mesopotamia. That death seemed sudden, but it was in fact the result of years ruling through iron and blood. Not long before, Caracalla had murdered his own brother Geta, right in their mother's arms, to seize the throne for himself. With the Edict of Caracalla in 212, he granted citizenship to the entire empire, not out of benevolence, but to expand the tax base. The people were outraged, the aristocracy grew cold with fear, and the military began to plot. The man who believed he was Alexander reborn died like a weary soldier, without trumpet, without ceremony, without a single lament. His death was not just a shock. It opened a power vacuum unseen since the civil wars after Caesar. His successor, Macrinus, a high-ranking official of non-noble birth, immediately took power. He had been the Praetorian prefect, an influential post, but rarely one that produces emperors. Macrinus came from the province of Mauritania, now Algeria, a North African of Berber origin, making him even more alien in the eyes of Rome's elite. He had no blood ties to the Severan dynasty, no divinity, no symbolism, no myth. And so, in a very short time, he revealed something Rome could not forgive. He lacked legitimacy. To the aristocracy and the military, he was merely a caretaker, a placeholder unconnected to any sacred lineage of the Severans. No one trusted him. And far away, in the province of Syria, someone began to see this void as an opportunity. That place housed many Eastern legions, including units from Emesa, a religious center dedicated to the sun god. These soldiers didn't just carry weapons, they carried faith. They weren't loyal to the Senate, nor bound by Roman noble traditions. They were loyal to what they believed was sacred. And when someone whispered that a child in Emesa was a descendant of Caracalla, bearer of divine blood, a sign of a new era, swords began to lean eastward. In the year 218 CE, in the city of Emesa, in the province of Syria, Julia Soemia Spasiana, a noblewoman from the prestigious Severan family, was making the biggest gamble of her life. Her son, Varius Avitus Bassianus, had just turned 14. The boy was as beautiful as a statue, with light curly hair, mesmerizing eyes, and he was the high priest of the sun god Heliogabalus, the most revered deity at the temple of Emesa. In his gold-threaded robe, the boy moved among the altars, conducted rituals, waved laurel branches, and stared into the crowd as if he weren't mortal. And it was that image, along with the sharp eyes of his mother, that sparked a fabricated legend woven by a woman's hand and a weary people's faith. Julia, the woman who saw Rome as a chessboard. Julia Soaemius was not some devout lady in the background. She was the niece of Julia Domna, the powerful empress of Septimius Severus, and cousin to Caracalla. When Caracalla was assassinated and Macrinus took the throne, it seemed the Severan line had lost its footing. But Julia, intelligent and cunning, wasn't about to let the opportunity slip away. She began whispering to soldiers, nobles, merchants, and priests that her son was Caracalla's secret child. No one had proof. No one dared refute it. And the boy, ironically, looked uncannily like a young Caracalla. So uncannily it was suspicious. So uncannily it was useful. A storm of symbols. Knowing that stories needed rituals, Julia organized a series of grand festivals to honor the sun god Heliogabalus in Emesa. In the blazing sunlight, the young priest emerged, hailed as a demigod. Syrian-born soldiers flocked in. Many had once fought under Caracalla, and they began to believe they were witnessing his political resurrection in this boy. That's Caracalla's son, the rumors said. The gods ordained this. In a weary empire, a boy in golden priestly robes, smiling like Apollo, became the new embodiment of faith. Army, money, and the fateful nod. Julia wasn't just good at spinning tales, she was also good at spinning purses. With help from her mother, Julia Mesa, a wealthy and influential woman, she poured money into army camps, handed out gifts to commanders, distributed food and sacred offerings to soldiers. It was Julia Mesa who was the silent architect behind this coup. Having lived in the palace during Severus's reign, she knew every artery in Rome's political body. She didn't just support it, she led it. She was the one who swore to the troops that the boy was Caracalla's real heir. She wasn't selling a boy. She was selling a living symbol of a fallen dynasty. And Rome, like all drifting empires, bought that hope with all the belief it had left. Once they had enough forces, they launched a rebellion against Macrinus. The Syrian army rose up and proclaimed Varius as Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, a false name, but one that sounded legendary. It evoked Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. That name wasn't chosen by chance. Marcus Aurelius awakened memories of a merciful emperor, the one who wrote meditations on the battlefield, while Antoninus was a name Caracalla himself had adopted to associate with imperial blood. With those two names, Julia didn't just forge a dynasty. She activated a string of symbols etched deep into Roman minds. It was a perfect psychological move in an era when politics was governed by nostalgia. But the coronation in Syria looked nothing like anything Rome had ever seen. Amid blazing desert and pounding bronze drums, the boy priest was carried through crowds of soldiers with feathers, incense, and sun symbols sewn onto cloth banners. No senate, no toga, no formal Latin. Only Aramaic chants, wild cheers, and a crowd that believed they were witnessing the god Heliogabalus entering the Roman age. It was a coronation of a god, not an emperor. In just a few weeks, Macrinus was defeated. He fled and was executed. The empire now belonged to a teenager who had never completed courtly rituals, but had memorized every divine chant. A boy worshipped as a god, and so, in June of 218, young Varius ascended the throne, becoming Emperor Heliogabalus, a name later associated with chaos, debauchery, and a dark chapter in Roman history. But in that moment, the people didn't know. The elites didn't dare question it, and the soldiers truly believed they had helped install a living god. Only one person knew the truth: Julia Soaemias, the woman who had built an empire from a convenient lie, because she knew full well the boy, though crowned emperor, had never stepped foot in Rome. He knew nothing of the Senate's customs, had never seen the arena, never trained in Roman law or warfare. He grew up in a temple, surrounded by incense and myths, in a world where gods were real and the throne was destiny. To Heliogabalus, Rome was not a destination. It was a land in need of conversion. And that was the beginning of a tragedy. When the Roman Empire welcomed the new emperor Heliogabalus, the citizens of the capital didn't know they were about to learn how to live inside a religious dream embroidered with gold, wine, and confusion. That year, the 14-year-old boy from Emesa, who had never seen the Senate, never learned Latin or worn a toga, entered Rome like a mystical flame from the east. And the aging city didn't know what to do except stare. A procession that reversed history. Heliogabalus didn't enter Rome like an emperor. He entered as a high priest, carried on a divine chariot draped in red silk, drawn by white horses, led by a black stone fallen from a meteor, the symbol of the god Heliogabalus. That stone, called the Betelgeuse, was seen as the physical manifestation of the god, not a statue, not an image, but the god himself walking among mortals. It had been worshipped in the temple at Emesa, where Heliogabalus was high priest. To him, nothing was holier. So in every procession, the stone came first, and the emperor walked behind like a loyal servant of the divine. He wore no imperial robe. Instead, he dressed in the priestly garb of Syria, his body oiled with perfumes, hair curled like Apollo's, holding a sacred staff and reciting chants in Aramaic. People on both sides of the street didn't know if they were welcoming a king or witnessing a mystical rite. Some bowed, some covered their eyes, and the senators looked at each other in silence. Some quietly withdrew from ceremonies, citing illness or state business. In private letters, Heliogabalus was called the sun goddess in a child's skin, a mix of mockery and fear. A proud Roman Senate had to learn how to remain silent before a ritual that did not belong to them, before a Rome no longer defined by Romans. When Rome became a temple of the East. Upon arriving in the capital, Heliogabalus ordered the construction of a new temple on the Palatine Hill, Heliogabalus, to worship the Syrian sun god instead of Jupiter. There, he hosted mysterious ceremonies with thick incense, dancing priestesses, and a drum-beating choir that echoed the rites of Emesa. Worse, he demanded that all sacred relics of Roman religion, from the Temple of Vesta to the altar of Mars, be gathered and placed around his stone, as if forcing all gods to kneel before his. The people didn't resist, because to resist was to resist the god. But beneath the gold was still a child. That boy, with a crown, was still a confused teenager. One night, Heliogabalus had 4 virgins dance around him until morning. The next, he secretly hosted a banquet with 3 Greek wrestlers. It was rumored he asked physicians if he could undergo surgery to become a woman completely, and was willing to pay a city's worth of gold for it. One tale says, during a private ritual, Heliogabalus knelt in the temple, tears flowing, pleading to the god Heliogabalus, "Grant me a body that matches my soul." Another time, before trusted priests, he stood in the temple and tore his robe, shouting, "I am not a man, nor a woman, I am fire." But the next morning, he stood before the temple again as a solemn high priest, reading prophecy with trembling hands and eyes red from sleeplessness. Religious sin or just puberty? To Romans, the issue wasn't sexuality. Same-sex relations had always existed across the empire. The issue was, who holds the staff? Who kneels? Heliogabalus, draped in flowing priestly robes, speaking in a soft voice, and playing the bride in sacred rites, broke Rome's unwritten rule. A Roman man must never be the one received. And when the emperor changed his gender identity, disrupted the faith, and neglected the empire, the Praetorian Guards, his closest protectors, began to waver. They had once supported Heliogabalus for the bonuses and promises from his grandmother, Julia Maesa. But now they stood watch over strange rituals, guarded all-night parties, and were even ordered not to disturb the emperor when dressed as a bride. In the barracks, whispers grew, "Are we guarding a child or a farce?" And Romans began to ask themselves, is this still Rome? In Rome, religion had once been a foundation, but under Heliogabalus it became a stage. No longer were there solemn rituals beneath marble domes, no more whispered prayers beside Vesta's altar. Now, the empire's rites were flamboyant performances of incense smoke, shimmering silk, and horrified stares. Rituals beyond belief at Heliogabalus, the newly built temple to honor the Syrian sun god. Heliogabalus didn't just perform ceremonies. The temple stood atop Palatine Hill, where the palaces of Augustus and Domitian once rose, now replaced by an Eastern-inspired structure. Its domed roof shimmered with red and gold stones, radiating like sunlight, with sunburst symbols pointing outward from the center. Inside, no Corinthian columns, only hanging silks, fragrant smoke, bronze serpent statues, and silver suns. Heliogabalus wasn't just a place of worship, it was a declaration. Rome now bowed to a light from the east, and he performed it. On the altar stage, bathed in gold and dazzling metal light, the emperor stood like a theatrical star. He wore a brilliant purple cloak weighing dozens of kilograms, embroidered with gemstones. Not a Roman crown, but a golden sunburst headpiece. He danced around the sacred black stone to Syrian drums and Eastern steps. The nobles below dared not breathe. The commoners, they called him the dancing emperor, uniting the gods or betraying them all. Heliogabalus declared, from now on, Heliogabalus would be the supreme god of the empire. Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, all must bow. He demanded that all sacred symbols of other religions be gathered and arranged around the black stone, like attendants of a new divine king. He even announced his goal to merge all faiths into one unified religion, with Heliogabalus above even the Christian god. Many Romans whispered, "We're living under a new religion," and no one agreed to it. In working-class neighborhoods, people quietly removed ancestral altars, afraid to be accused of disloyalty to the sun god. Christian priests were hunted. Followers of Isis were forced to swear loyalty to the black stone. In public baths and markets, people whispered words like heresy, superstition, then fell silent when Syrian guards passed. Fear soaked into daily life, not because of the god, but because of the man claiming his name. To cement his divine authority, Heliogabalus hosted public sacrifices unlike anything seen before. Ceremonies were held in large squares or before Heliogabalus, where citizens were summoned as if to military duty. When the blade came down, the audience didn't just see blood. They heard the cries of the offerings, the pounding drums, and smelled the stench of hot blood under the noon sun. Children were blindfolded, mothers bowed their heads, and nobles vanished. But the poor pushed forward, because after blood came meat. And Heliogabalus, he did not blink. To him, blood was ink to rewrite divine order. Hundreds of wild bulls, black sheep, sacred birds were sacrificed at once. Each ceremony lasted day and night, with the scent of blood spreading through the alleys. He personally used the sacred blade to slash throats, blood spraying onto his crimson cloak like it was dyed with power. To the elite, it was a blasphemy. To the poor, it was free, fresh meat. To Heliogabalus, it was the reenactment of a redefined universe, with himself at its center. In one rite, he declared, "All gods are light, and I am the sun." He even minted new coins, not with his portrait, but with the sacred black stone. Heliogabalus didn't want to be remembered as a man. He wanted to be remembered as a god made flesh, the point where heaven met earth. On statues and coins, Heliogabalus was divine. But in the dark, he was just a child. Beneath the robe weighing several kilos, behind proclamations that shook the empire, was a boy no one ever held. Before arriving in Rome, he had lived in Emesa, a city in eastern Syria, where the temple of the sun god was larger than the town hall. He grew up among incense and ritual garb. Every morning, he learned to stand upright, hand raised toward the rising sun. He never learned to read Roman law, but had memorized prayers in ancient Aramaic. In that world, no one called him Marcus. They called him Light of the Divine. And that world did not follow him to Rome. No one called him Marcus, his birth name. No one called him Heliogabalus, the dynastic name later given by historians. Throughout his reign, people only called him Pontifex Maximus, High Priest Sacerdos Dei Solis, Priest of the Sun, God Dominus, Lord. All were roles, not a person. No one asked if he slept well. No one asked if he dreamed of his father. Because Rome didn't ask. Rome just watched and waited to judge. There were nights when the drums of ritual had gone silent, when the sacrificial blood had dried, that Heliogabalus lay alone in a room tiled with golden stone. No one to sing him to sleep. No mother, only a statue of the god Heliogabalus in the corner, staring at him with blank eyes. His mother, Julia Suemius, had not held him since the day he wore the crown. In court, she called him Your Majesty. In private, she still called him My Lord. When he cried, she didn't soothe. She summoned eunuchs, told them to bring wine and lyres. She didn't see a child. She saw a tool, and the divine in the shape of her son. No friends, only Syrian attendants, paid to bow and say, "You are the creator." In a 10-step wide room, he curled into a dark crimson silk robe, pulling it over his head as if it were the arms of someone who wasn't real. Heliogabalus played empire like a child plays dolls. They dressed him in gold, gems and titles, but forgot he was still flesh. A gilded puppet, paraded across squares, but with no strings tied to a loving heart. He learned to smile when dressed in gowns, but never learned to be sad, because sadness is a luxury to a god without a mother. No one taught him how to rule. They only taught him how to be divine. He chose brides like choosing costumes. He married a Vestal virgin, not out of love, but to see whether the gods would really get angry. He held blood sacrifice festivals, not out of belief, but to see how frightened the crowds would get, all just to be noticed, heard, to feel he had the power to do what no one else dared. When the curtain closed, Heliogabalus still sat there, alone. No peer, no father, no one saying, "You're just a child, you don't have to be the sun." He didn't choose the crown. His mother placed it on his head. He didn't choose the rituals. Adults taught him. He didn't choose to be emperor. It's just that no one told him he could say no. Heliogabalus didn't just break religion and politics. He poured cold water onto Rome's definition of masculinity, sexuality, and what they called natural order, a body that refused to sit still. Ancient Rome tolerated many forms of sexuality, but roles and positions were sacred. A male citizen could engage with another man as long as he was the dominant one. To be passive was to lose virilitatis, the essence of manhood. Heliogabalus didn't care. He liked playing the female role. He even said, "I want to be called queen." He wore dresses, heavy makeup, called his court officials "my girlfriends." He didn't hide marrying men, not just one, but two, both Zoticus and Heracles. Later, historians would write, he begged surgeons to create a vagina for him. What no one dared say aloud, he said in front of the gods. But don't mistake this for someone quietly living out their gender identity. This was a Roman emperor, putting his most private truths on public display, like a political whirlwind. He auctioned off his own body to crowds, then placed the highest bid himself. He spoke to the gods kneeling, calling them "my lover." He turned his own body into ritual, as if that flesh too was territory to conquer. His body was no longer flesh. It was a map, redrawn with rouge, perfume, and high-pitched laughter in the imperial court. Every time Heliogabalus lined his eyes, painted his lips, or wore a gown, it was a political battle. Against Rome, against history, and against everyone who believed men could only exist one way. To the nobility, who defined power by silence and solemnity, Heliogabalus was a nightmare. He was too seductive and didn't ask for permission. When power wears a dress, Rome could stomach blood. Rome could forgive tyranny. But Rome could not stand a living god in makeup. Heliogabalus didn't hide his desires. He turned everything into theatre. A male-male wedding was held before the nation. Heliogabalus wore a white gown embroidered with gold, a flower crown, with bridesmaids leading the procession. His groom, Zoticus, was given a ring before countless officials. After their wedding night, Heliogabalus entered court beaming, bragging openly about Zoticus's love-making prowess, not whispered, but declared in the imperial hall. A sacrifice followed a night of public lovemaking. The elite shrank back. They weren't afraid of being ruled. They were afraid of being made to see, forced to look directly at a reality they denied. That gender, as they knew it, was just a layer of paint. And Heliogabalus, with every blade of eyeliner, every dress, every coquettish smile, peeled that paint off the whole dynasty. The more he exposed himself to the light, the deeper he drowned in shadow. He wore dresses, not to be loved, but to be seen. He called himself a woman, not to shock, but to exist. But the harder he tried to be seen, the more people saw through him. No one embraces a living god in lipstick. No one believes someone who discards virilitatis can rule an empire. Heliogabalus lived like a deity, but he forgot one thing. Gods must be worshipped, not feared or treated as entertainment. Festivals filled with wine and animal scents. In his short reign, Heliogabalus held dozens of ceremonies no one dared to imagine. Elephant races through cemeteries, offerings to gods using wine instead of holy water, a naval battle in the Roman Colosseum with red wine instead of water. He called it Vinum Dei, the wine of the gods. On another occasion, he hosted a nighttime banquet under rose petals. Tons of petals were dropped from the ceiling, covering the entire space to the point where several guests nearly suffocated. During such joyful events, Heliogabalus held raffles with prizes ranging from real gold and slaves to a knight with a chained leopard. Sometimes he scattered coins from balconies, mixed with bugs, snakes, and camel dung. Laughter erupted, but so did screams and tears. Guests were soaked and drunk. The crowd clapped, but silently thought, when will this end? Opulence no longer equals power. He dressed like a celestial emperor descending from Mars. Peacock robes, golden platform shoes, a helmet encrusted with jewels. Heliogabalus believed opulence was the language of power. But Romans didn't read that language. They were used to white togas and stern faces. They believed authority came from restraint. And Heliogabalus, with 4 male attendants carrying mirrors whenever he adjusted his lipstick, shattered that entire notion of dignity. The crowd began to turn away. At first, the public was curious, then amused, and finally, nauseated. An emperor turning politics into theatre, ceremonies into magic tricks, gods into boyfriends. And they began doing the most dangerous thing. They stopped bowing. The chants of Heliogabalus Sol Invictus, once echoing through the streets, now fell silent. People no longer crowded to see the royal procession. Many deliberately took detours knowing the emperor would appear. Some even melted down statues of Heliogabalus to recast them into door hooks. Devotion turned to disgust. And worst of all, no one believed he was a god anymore. They just saw a boy in costume, lost in a play no one wanted to watch. There were no praises as he passed, no kneeling before his temple, no desire to believe that the sun god Heliogabalus was really just a dainty child in a velvet dress. Heliogabalus lived like a deity, but deities need followers. And in the end, he stood alone, on a golden altar, holding sacred relics, his back turned to a murmuring crowd slowly walking away mid-ceremony. No one rebelled against him. No one dared revolt. But they still went to Jupiter's temple. They still prayed to Mars, to Venus, to Saturn. They lit candles, burned incense, but avoided Heliogabalus's new temple like it was a trap. The Romans, rather than rising up, took revenge in the quietest way. They refused to enter his world. Heliogabalus could rearrange the gods, merge temples, even declare Jupiter obsolete. But people just quietly turned their backs. A god without worshippers is a statue no one dusts. They simply refuse to believe in him. And in the world of gods, that is a death sentence. Heliogabalus was like Dionysus, the god of wine and frenzy, but had no procession of sacred maidens. He was like Orpheus, who enchanted others through performance, but no one wanted to look back. Named Heliogabalus, linked to the sun god he served, he was a dazzling embodiment of light, makeup, and drums. But that light, though blinding, just made people squint and turn away. While Heliogabalus put on makeup, wore peacock robes, and called himself a goddess, elsewhere in the palace, a boy was learning to stay silent. Alexander, a quiet prince. Severus Alexander, a distant cousin of Heliogabalus, was brought into the palace by Julia Maesa, grandmother to both. He wasn't handsome, not flamboyant, didn't laugh out loud. But he spoke proper Latin, read Plato without yawning, and most importantly, when generals spoke, he listened. In an empire tired of fire dances and bizarre rituals, Alexander's image was a bowl of cool water in a desert of glitter. Heliogabalus began to boil. At first, Heliogabalus saw Alexander as decoration. But when soldiers began calling Alexander Little Augustus, Heliogabalus's gaze changed. He tried to send his cousin away, cut his allowance, sent him far from the palace. But Alexander didn't react. He just bowed. Behind that silence, Julia Maesa had begun a new chess game. She summoned philosophy tutors to court. Alexander learned rhetoric, treasury management, and the art of silence. While Heliogabalus studied Egyptian eyeliner, Alexander memorized Caesar's oaths. One transformed into a deity, the other was molded to be human. And this, though unspoken, lit a quiet hope among the soldiers. The more patient he was, the more beloved he became. And that made Heliogabalus, who once called himself a god, feel more invisible than ever. He began to envy in the way only a lonely child could. He searched Alexander's journals, banned anyone from saying his name in court, and secretly asked his mother, "Why is everyone looking that way?" The more he obsessed, the more he noticed what he was losing: attention, trust, and the right to cry like a boy. But instead of crying, he added another layer of lipstick and ordered all mirrors in the palace replaced with two-way glass so he wouldn't have to watch himself age too fast. The army chose, silently. No drums of rebellion, no manifestos, just quiet nods from the Praetorian Guard. The soldiers sworn to protect the emperor. They didn't attack. They simply stopped protecting. One morning, Heliogabalus awoke, donned his glittering purple robe, ready to perform the daily sun sacrifice. But no guard stood outside his room. No one brought his crown. No servant prepared his litter. He called out, only to hear his own echo. Finally trembling, he ran into the temple to hide. When he turned back, no one was there. No guards, no chants, no loyal eyes. He, who once had elephants trample cemeteries in the name of ritual, was now alone in his purple dress. A cousin who never asked for the throne, Severus. Alexander held no victory feast. He didn't order executions, didn't compose poems. He simply sat on the throne. He never asked for it, didn't scheme for it, never whispered about it to anyone. When his grandmother placed his hand on the throne, Alexander asked only one question: "Do I have to kill anyone?" And when the answer was no, he nodded. No joy of conquest, just acceptance, as if the throne wasn't glory, but a responsibility to preserve for someone else. And the empire, for the first time in years, exhaled a long sigh. Not in war, not on stage. Heliogabalus, who called himself a god, ended as someone no one wanted to remember. A god no longer prayed to. After the morning of abandonment, Heliogabalus and his mother, Julia Soemius, ran to the sun god's temple. Once radiant with golden light, now only emptiness. No incense, no guards, no soul awaited him in the darkness. He, who once painted worlds with wine, diamonds, and lions, was now just a trembling body wrapped in gem-studded cloth. No sword defended him. According to Herodian and Cassius Dio, Heliogabalus was seized by his own Praetorian guards inside the temple. No one resisted. No servant intervened. He and his mother were dragged into the public square. Those who once knelt at his feet now looked at him like a stain. He begged. He screamed. But the first stab, not fatal. Heliogabalus thrashed, cried, pleaded with the soldiers by name, but no one answered. Julia Soemius threw herself over him, but was slashed like old silk. The crowd hurled rotten fish, trash, and curses. No one saw blood, only the gold powder smeared from each cut, mixing with dust like a rejected offering. One more slash to the face. Then they kept hacking, not out of hatred, but like cleaning up a historical mistake. Cloaca Maxima, where kings aren't named. Their bodies were dragged through the streets. No funeral, no autopsy, no final words. And then, according to many sources, they were thrown into the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's largest sewer system. Once a brilliant feat of Etruscan engineering, now a black hole of collective memory, where trash, animal corpses, and unwanted things went. Not a tomb, not a shrine, just a place where sewage and blood mingled. When they tossed Heliogabalus's body in, they weren't just rejecting him. They declared, "You never belonged to humanity." No throne, no altar, only waste and silence. Damnatio memoriae, erased from history. Heliogabalus wasn't just killed. He was erased, his statue smashed, his name scraped from stone. Not by decree, but as a second ritual, a symbolic death. In Antioch, his statue was toppled, decapitated, and replaced with the face of Mars. In Roman temples, stonecutters quietly chipped away his name overnight, so it wouldn't appear at dawn. Coins bearing his face, once spread across the empire, were melted into horseshoes, turning imperial imagery into something trampled. Every law, edict, and coin with his face was melted down. No one was allowed to speak of him as emperor, only to whisper, like a nightmare that had been too loud. Heliogabalus didn't die as a king. He died as a symbol of limits. The limit of freedom without control. The limit of power without consent. The limit of a boy made into a god before he learned how to be human. And if you find this ending tragic, you're right. He was once just a 14-year-old child, dragged onto the stage of history, wrapped in a robe no one taught him how to wear. He wasn't a monster. He was the consequence of a political game, where the players disappeared and the pawn shattered. The Romans did not forgive. But history, if it's fair, won't just remember him as a joke. It will remember him as a child who never had the chance to grow up. And scarier still, it wasn't even surprising. A person can die many times. Heliogabalus died in body, died in identity, and finally, died in the memory of the very civilization that once worshipped him. History does not accept inconveniences. Heliogabalus was one of the few Roman emperors subjected to damnatio memoriae, the punishment of erasure from collective memory. This was reserved only for those deemed an unforgivable shame of the empire. Damnatio memoriae was not just an administrative decree, it was a collective ritual. Statues would be smashed, names scraped from all official documents, buildings renamed, and even images erased from paintings and coins. No trace left, as if the person had never existed. Of over 70 Roman emperors, only a handful received this punishment. Heliogabalus was one of them, alongside Nero, Domitian, and other names that once embarrassed the entire empire. Not just because he dressed like an Eastern god, not just because he married a slave and broke rituals, but because he exposed a truth Rome didn't want to face. That power doesn't just corrupt, it turns the weak into jokes, if there's no system to hold them up behind the scenes. The ones who erased him were also the ones who created him. Julia Mesa, the one who put him on the throne, was also the one pulling strings to replace him with Alexander. The courtiers who once praised him as a god were the first to carve Alexander's name into stone. Even his own mother, Julia Soaemias, had used his name to manipulate the court. And so, after Heliogabalus died, they erased him like a statistical error. But the history books weren't entirely silent. Cassius Dio and Herodian, though not in agreement, still wrote about Heliogabalus, not to glorify, but to warn. Modern historians view him as an extreme phenomenon, as the embodiment of absurdity when power falls into the hands of a child, as proof that gender, religion, and identity never remain still in history. Some contemporary researchers even see Heliogabalus as the earliest royal transgender figure, with his declarations of wanting to become a woman and his willingness to undergo surgery if possible. According to scholar Andrew Wallace Hadrill and analyses by J.E. Lendon, Heliogabalus's use of female pronouns, feminine clothing, and his request for surgical transformation indicate early signs of gender dysphoria in an ancient context. While modern labels can't be applied wholesale, what Heliogabalus experienced, rejecting traditional male roles, openly engaging in same-sex relationships, and redefining gender in ceremonial life, makes him a figure the LGBTQ+ community now looks back on as part of a history long left untold. So he, though erased by name, still lives on in the least expected place, in the discourse around identity and freedom. Heliogabalus does not need pity, he does not need whitewashing, but he does need to be viewed with fairer eyes, not just as a madman, but as a flawed product, born from ambition, raised in loneliness, and killed because no one taught him how to be human. A civilization is not only strong because of the monuments it builds, but also because of the souls it fails to bury entirely. And maybe, in the end, Heliogabalus never truly disappeared. He still lingers between the lines scraped off stone tablets, between statues with broken heads, between coins that were melted down. No tomb, no medals. But memory, once leaked, can't be controlled. He still lives, like a tiny crack in the wall of history, where light seeps through and a question emerges. Who did we forget in the stories we wrote too fast? He's just waiting to be told again, for the first time, as a human being. We don't rewrite history to forgive it. We rewrite it to recognize just how blind we once were. Mary Beard, Roman historian.